Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
That's right. And how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about. And we talk about that topic for an hour or so. And today we're going to be talking about, the topic is boundaries are your friend. So before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you enjoy the podcast and find the information helpful, please subscribe and share it with your family and friends. And if you really enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving a review. All that stuff really helps out to get the message out.
Yeah, but I'm still stuck on the way you responded to when I said I was a marriage and family therapist. Yeah, that's right.
Is that how it was?
That's how it sounded in my ear. I don't know. What does that mean? It's like, that's the bad news.
That's the good news. That's it's free therapy, like we say. So today I want to talk about boundaries because we never really we talked about them here and there, but we never dedicated an episode to them. And I think they're really important. And they were something that I didn't even really learn about until probably my late 30s. So, and when I did learn about the concept of boundaries and really start to understand it, I was like, oh, this is why my life is kind of a mess in some ways. Not a mess, but there were definitely some issues. So what was your experience with boundaries, and like when did you become aware of them, and how do you put them into practice?
Well, honestly, I think all of us are dying to hear more about your story on that because, first of all, how did you not hear about boundaries until you're almost 40? And then what kind
who's talking about them?
Well, I don't know. It seems like there are, at least on the media I listen to, it seems like it comes up, but also in terms, even without the word maybe in your vocabulary, you knew when somebody crossed a line, right?
Well, I had a friend who liked pushing lines. And I think when you have that for 18 onto 20 something, or not 18, when you have that for like a 20-year friendship. So I think that was one of the aspects why I didn't. And then having a circle of friends that respected boundaries, but also thinking that they were kind of lame, like thinking like a boundary means that I'm not free, like just having some sort of irrational belief maybe around it.
You're weak.
You're weak if you have it, or you're not. Yeah, you're just not as open, and you're more fun and spontaneous if you kind of don't have any boundaries. And having a family that didn't really talk about it, or if you did try to express a boundary, maybe it not being heard or just kind of disregarded. Having a lot of bad work experiences where when you do speak up, you get punished for it. Having school environments where when you speak up, you get punished. So it's like, there's a lot.
Yeah, it would be confusing. And now that makes perfect sense. Considering how you've experienced life, now I see what you're talking about.
Yeah. So you knew about them, though, it sounds like, much sooner than I did.
A few years sooner, maybe, because of Al-Anon. And I began attending Al-Anon through the intervention of a friend who was in recovery for years and years as an alcoholic. And he'd been going to AA, and he knew about Al-Anon and had been to meetings, but and he also knew I didn't have a drinking problem, but that I had been reared in an alcoholic family. So going to groups where, as I think back on it, I have to borrow a page from your history too to explain my reaction to Al-Anon. Right. I'm sitting in these groups where people are talking about these very sensitive subjects, really touchy subjects, and I had this premonition, sort of of impending doom. And I realized I was, in the back of my mind, there was this child who was afraid that any minute now parents were going to kick the door in and come in and tell us all to go away, stop talking what we're doing. And then I Oh, okay. So this is like one of the boundaries in my crazy alcoholic family is that you don't talk about alcohol
Hmm.
and you don't talk about how it's affecting you as the
Hmm.
non-drinker. So when I realized that, I realized, okay, life comes with rules, and I've internalized some really negative rules. But what would be the the smarter rules, or the better, more adaptive rules? And I remember reading Claudia Black's work, and she had a book on with some rules in it. In the alcoholic family, we're all taught to don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel.
Hmm.
And of course, the remedy to getting well and getting past all of that craziness of the alcoholic family is to break the rules and do the opposite.
Hmm.
Learn how to trust certain people, learn to feel what you're feeling,
Hmm.
and learn to talk about what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And but funny thing, how many of us in America come from perfectly functional families? Well, virtually nobody, right?
Hmm.
And so in your circle of friends, I'm just thinking about, all of them, and the teachers, and the kind of school system you were in, and the lessons you were learning. I'm sure there were great teachers and great people here and there scattered around, but if you're getting punished for talking, if you're getting punished for not wanting to talk about personal things,
Yeah.
then you're getting a lot of reinforcement of the crazy alcoholic family rules that I
Hmm.
experienced.
Yeah.
So, and that one about being weak, like if you have any inhibitions at all about sharing the most personal, private part of who you are, like, or even something that is maybe not so personal, so private, but rather precious, and you're not willing to share it just yet, like a date you had with a special person, and the fact that maybe you exchange kisses, or even a first kiss, and that could be really the sort of special thing not everybody feels comfortable sharing.
Hmm.
And I get that. That makes so much sense. But I can also imagine quite easily the people around us saying, "Oh, come on, don't be a fill in the blank with
Yeah.
something negative. Um, don't be a wimp, don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
Did you kiss her or not? And how far did you get?" And to be able to say, "It's none of your fucking business."
Yeah.
It's and leave it at that. But it's really hard when, I think, especially the younger we are, we so crave acceptance
Hmm.
from our peer group, and we don't want to rock the boat. And typically, all of us grow up in families where nobody is modeling a really great way of setting boundaries.
Hmm.
Like, I can't believe you just talked to me like that. I never talk to you that way because I know it would always be wrong. You owe me an apology.
Hmm.
And to be able to set a boundary like that uh, is pretty strong, right? And I never heard an adult say anything like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I have a story. I was even when in my 30s, late 30s, when I was starting to become aware of them. I had the friend for 20 years who was difficult and I'm not friends with anymore. I was working with him and I said something like along the lines of like, sometimes when you teach me, it comes across as condescending. I said to him, and he freaked out to the max, like screaming top of his lungs, "If you don't like it, get the F out of here. This is how I teach. I don't know how else to teach you," like going on a tantrum. And I'm like, "Dude, chill out." And then he's like freaking out. He's like, "Get the hell out of here, blah, blah, blah." And just for like a minute, 2 minutes straight, like just completely thought I was going to have to fight him.
Well, that certainly cleared up the whole issue of condescension.
Yeah. And then then we kind of worked in silence. I didn't talk about it. I went home, told my girlfriend about it, and I was like, this feels really weird. It doesn't feel like I should be treated that way. That didn't feel right. And then I went back to him and had a conversation like I'm sitting here with you. And I said, "Hey, I get that I said that and I apologize for that, but that reaction was kind of way over the top and I don't deserve to be treated that way." And he said, "Yeah, you do, because you're in my house and you disrespected me. It's my workplace and I could say whatever I want to you." And then I essentially then had to then, this is like 36.
This is what it sounds like, audience, when I have my jaw dropping down to the floor. It's like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So then, yeah. And then I had to make a decision, and I decided to, we were kind of like working in business a little bit together. And I was like, you could have all the stuff back. I just want to end the stuff there, and that's it. And then I left. And then I stayed not friends with him for probably a year. And then it was like motorcycle riding season. And I was like, all right, come on. Is he still like, I just wanted to go ride with somebody. And I figured maybe he matured a little bit, and I brought him back in my life. And then like a year later, that's when him and his girlfriend chose to be friends with my ex-girlfriend over me. So it was just like, I should have kept it going then. But it was then me, like, when you get hit with that, you question your own sense. Like, was I wrong? Should I not have questioned him like that? Cause like, like that's kind of what I was thinking, and kind of made me feel bad because he took zero responsibility for it. And I just kind of accepted it. But now that I'm 40 and I'm no longer in my late 30s, I would say, no, thank you. And then I would not call him back. I'd just ride myself.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing of you. And just to be clear, in our relationship, I'm not making a joke when I say it would always be okay for me to tell you how you're feeling, even if it's something I'd really rather not hear. Like, I would hate to think that you would be feeling condescended to in our relationship. And that brings up the subject of safety. The first most important boundary, like in my book, We're All Like This, is talking about our safety. And it isn't just physical safety, it's psychological safety. Mm-hmm. So for us to feel safe means, to me, to be free of abuse. Yeah. Now, if somebody brings up, let's say, a subject that is really a red hot button issue for me, like I always get upset when people, I'm thinking of an example, let's say, bring up a certain political attitude of being a know-it-all. Mm-hmm. And that really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's sort of what I'm talking about, but that's a little esoteric. And I could even say something there, though, about, I really don't feel comfortable when mm-hmm. you talk to me about politics as if you're the guru and I'm the little grasshopper who just doesn't understand things.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that's every conversation you have with a Republican. No offense, Republicans, but
no, we love our Republican listeners. Don't listen to that man.
And I'm a registered independent. Been so since I was 18, just saying. But Republicans, I've noticed, get in arguments with themselves about stuff, and not to make it political, but it's like, I've had friends to be like, why did you, it's like they want you to like agree with them so much. And I've had it be like that with Democrats too sometimes, but mostly Republicans.
Yeah, that's just it. I think it can be really any group because it's such a human thing to do. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's young people do it, old people do it. It's just very, very human. I've been in groups of mixed race where everybody was doing it, and all different ages, both genders, or all 37 genders, however many we have now. And it's just a very human faux pas that actually creates so much misery. And for the person who is behaving in a way that's condescending or in a way that is otherwise violating our boundaries, mm-hmm. so often they don't really get the pushback that they need to start thinking about things differently and modifying their behavior, because so often very few of us can have the commitment to speak up or the courage to speak up, the commitment to the friendship. Sometimes I really believe strongly that sometimes in order to save a friendship, you need to risk the friendship.
Yeah.
And so to bring up things like, I want to talk to you about what happened the other day. And then well, what do you mean? Well, do you remember when you said blah, blah, blah? And I said blah, blah. No, I don't. Well, okay. Can you believe that it happened? Well, yeah, I guess. And then to say, well, this is what doesn't work for me. And the other person might explode like your friend did. Mm-hmm. But even that business of exploding, that's just unacceptable. you know. And even if I'm working for money for somebody else and they're paying me a great salary, a great hourly wage, it isn't appropriate. There is no hourly wage that compensates for treating me in a demeaning way.
Yeah.
So that's not what I signed up for, you know, that was part of the gig. So
he would disagree with you.
Exactly.
And then he also agrees that that's the way you deal with relationships too.
Right. And he gets to think, he has the right to think what he wants to think. And then another 10, 20 years down the road, I'll be asking him, so how's that working out for you?
Yeah. Well, his girlfriend's going to school to become a psychologist. So I'm
Perfect.
I'm looking to see how that, which he doesn't believe. And he thinks all the textbooks are wrong. And he doesn't believe in psychology and thinks it's stupid for weak people.
Stupid.
It's
just like those doctors with their fancy medical school degrees.
Yeah.
So stupid.
Well, it's all a conspiracy. It's all controlled by the few people who are pulling all the puppet strings. And
yeah, I'm still one of those elitists who believe that the elites who are educated more than I am know better than I know. I don't. I was listening to somebody the other day talking about, well, you know what? I'm getting off topic, so I don't want to do that. I want to get back to boundaries because, you know, part of this boundary thing, when people violate my boundaries, but I've never set a boundary because I was presuming upon their good-heartedness and their civilized manners. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, we find out, oh, they don't have any manners, that is, or good-heartedness. Well, then it's incumbent upon me as an adult to speak up and to say, hold, even if I'm confused, I'm saying this for the listeners out there. If you're in a moment where you're getting abused and you're very confused about what the hell's going on, to just hold up a hand as if you're a cop holding up traffic, and you stop the traffic, and eventually somebody will say, what are you doing? And then even use the word, hold up, hold up, hold up. It's never going to be okay for you to talk to me like that. Well, you didn't. I understand what happened here, and I'm willing to discuss everything, but I'm not willing to discuss anything so long as you're abusing me.
Yeah. And
that's, to me, like the ultimate boundary. I'm willing to talk about just about any subject you can name, particularly in intimate relationships. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the boundary in my mind is, you know, with less than intimate relationships, like occasionally I'll be in a podcast and somebody will ask me what I think is an inappropriate question that's way too personal, especially from somebody who doesn't even know me.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, yeah, when we get to know each other a lot better, I'd be looking forward to answering that question.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. And that's a gentle brushback on a gentle way of setting a boundary.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. And you could do that with friendships and relationships as well. I mean,
even in a dating situation, you know, if somebody asks you, a man or a woman is being asked a question that is just a little more personal than they feel comfortable getting, there's no reason they don't get to set a boundary that's for now. You know, for now, I'm not comfortable talking about that. But I'm willing to take a wait and see if you're willing to take a rain check on that.
Yeah.
And so, and then for some people, it's like, well, what's wrong with talking about it? How come you can't talk about it?
Yeah.
I don't
push
know.
it.
Yeah. And they're pushing it. And then, well, I'll tell you, I'm totally down for blah, 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 you know, whatever it is they were talking about. But there's a false equivalency there. Just because you're comfortable with a certain amount of exposure on a very personal issue doesn't mean there's an obligation on all of us to be just like you.
So what is that for those people who are like that? Is that some sort of
self-centeredness?
Self-centered.
that my life and the way I lead it is the standard for everybody. Everybody would be so much happier if they would just be like me.
Yeah. Is that like a personality disorder thing, or is
I don't know if it is. I would need more information, but I definitely think it's controlling, manipulative, and self-centered. And it's really somewhat, at the very least, it's incredibly naive to hear an adult talk like that.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who's in their 20s, 30s, 40s. Does it really? You really think?
But they think when they think they know more than you, though, then they're going to talk like that.
Right. They might. but like, I think I know more than most people about my business, relationships and how to help people work out their love lives. And yet I would have to admit I've been wrong many times, that my clients have taught me many things over the years, and that they all deserve to have their say, and that sometimes my biggest gift to another human being is just being willing to listen. It doesn't cost me anything to listen. And I just don't think there's any excuse for saying, well, look, I know so much better than you.
Yeah.
I mean, that is going to be true with my surgeon. If I go to get surgery, I would hope he knows better than I do. But that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm okay with whatever procedure he's outlining that he's planning on taking.
Yeah.
And because I'm the consumer and I'm the one who gets to decide that. And it's the same way in relationships. Just because somebody may know more than I know about a given topic doesn't mean, and therefore I'm just supposed to shut up and go along with that.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, even with writing or improv, anything that I do, I get so much feedback. I mean, most of the times I'm just asking improvisers questions on their own process, and then they respond back, and I gain a lot from that. And then whenever I do act like I know everything, I feel like I get tripped up, or something will even me out, like within the universe, like some sort of natural thing.
Well, for me too, I some of my best therapy experiences are just, in fact, I had one just last week, and I told the group, so they were just doing such an amazing job without me that I really could have been dead. I could have just not shown up for group that night. I could be deceased, and those 10 guys could get together and do an amazing job of having a group that was really productive. So when everything is going right, I'm willing to shut up. I'm willing to learn from other people.
Yeah.
But I too have my perspective, and sometimes I do have a personal need to say something. So when we're talking about boundaries, getting back to that subject, I think that, boundaries are a lot like boundaries between nations. We call them borders, but that's a boundary. And a boundary, you don't get to just say, this is my boundary, and then expect everybody to honor that, or to not send invading armies across the line that you've determined is. You can't just, well, I shared my boundaries and they just didn't respect them. No, you actually, as an adult, you have the obligation of defending your boundaries as well. And that goes for defending the boundaries of your children and your family. So we all have that obligation.
So you set and then defend.
Yeah, you must. If merely setting the boundaries and informing this person who I thought was a good person isn't enough, and they say, well, what are you going to do about it when I do blah, blah, blah? I'm going to do the same thing I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, you're out of line, and you owe me an apology.
Yeah.
And so if for the person, I think so many therapists do a really great job of introducing the concept of boundaries, talking about boundaries, informing their clients about the right to boundaries, and on so many different issues. But they don't typically do a good job of talking about defending the boundaries.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's because you forget sometimes that there are people willing. I mean, just because you said it doesn't mean people are respecting it.
Right. They're not necessarily going to honor your boundaries. So when you say, look, I'm really not comfortable opening up about that. And it could be your mom, your dad, it could be somebody else in your family, it could be someone you're dating says, oh, come on, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll begin the manipulation there. I don't mind if I talk about that, or I've shared stuff like that with you plenty of times.
Yeah.
Again, my listening to you respectfully doesn't create in me a moral obligation to share the same level of content with you. That's why when we do, what I call laddering up our intimacy levels, if I share my favorite music or my favorite thoughts on a given topic in the news, and the other person doesn't, they have the right to not do that. But obviously, we're not in a truly intimate relationship at that level.
Mm-hmm.
That for whatever reason, they don't feel safe to share their political point of view or their religious point of view or even their view on, say, sexuality with their date. And I think, isn't that only normal? It's so egotistical to think everyone in the world should be just like me.
Yeah.
And to realize, no, everybody's different. We all have different comfort zones, different levels of comfort with different subjects. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually not a bug. It's a feature of the human race. All that diversity is part of what makes us so interesting to get to know.
Mm. And so if somebody is like pushing them to like, and you're trying to defend them, defend, I mean, then you eventually have the power to then end the relationship, or if it's a romantic relationship or a friendship, you kind of have to then take action. So it's set, defend, act. Right?
Well, yeah, maybe, I mean, I don't have it. I've never thought of it in terms of, some kind of a sequence like that. And I love the way you said that. And if that would work, I'm all for it. I'm not sure because I haven't really thought it through. I know that for me, one of the options, and of course, we're also including the workplace in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there can be supervisors or coworkers who are very disrespectful, or even people I'm supervising as a manager who are very disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go ahead and set boundaries. And if people continue to violate those boundaries, you can defend your boundary by being more emphatic, by being more plain spoken, by letting them know that this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. And in a workplace, you have the option of maybe going to HR. My faith in HRs across the country has been a little bit damaged because I've heard too many stories about how people would take a story about abuse in the workplace to HR, and HR's hands seem to be tied, or the person in charge really doesn't do anything proactive or assertive.
Yeah.
It's not in the employee handbook, that we are running a safe workplace. Any form of abuse, verbal or physical, is absolutely unacceptable and grounds for termination, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. We don't do that. And I don't think we have any particular clarity on that in our country as a culture. We're still not clear on that. Even when I was a boy or in my 20s and early 30s, I started collecting examples of abuse in the cartoons, like the Sunday Funnies.
You were collecting them?
Uh-huh. And because I think the funnies reflect at least what our collective sense of humor and what we might all laugh at.
Yeah.
And when I started, the funnies were full of, and I have all these characters in my head who don't even have comic strips anymore, but some of them do. But there were lots of comic strips where the wife would be chasing the husband with a rolling pin in her hand.
Yeah.
Or the sergeant.
Classic.
Yeah, the sergeant would be kicking the enlisted man's butt.
Mm-hmm.
Or the king would be referring somebody for torture.
Mm-hmm.
And in every case, I mean, the abuse was the point of humor. I mean, it was the pivot point where it's, that is so funny,
it's so relatable.
Yeah. And that, I'm happy to say, is for the most part really not part of the comic strips anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Our culture has changed to that extent that we're not finding humor in abusive behavior. And some of it, quite a lot of it, was happening in the workplace. A lot of it was domestic. But some of it was even, between children, where they were getting abusive with each other. And people seem to have backed way off of that. But there are families and pockets of culture around our country where being abusive is still quite the norm, and it's justified, as with your friend who, well, you work with me and you're in my domain, and so I have the right to tell you how it is. And if you can't handle it, well, you're the one with the problem. You're the pussy.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm abusive. I'm just telling you how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they are uninformed and they don't understand the proper way to treat human beings. And they will ultimately, I think, experience failure over much of their life, because the only people who will put up with that over time are other sick people who have no sense of boundaries.
Yeah.
So it's, I think treating people with dignity and respect is sort of like the baseline boundary that you see typically in professional circumstances, like typically, not always, but typically with doctors and nurses in a hospital, taking care of the injured. They're not demeaning them, talking down to them. Mm-hmm. How could you? Drunk again, John? I can't believe it. How many times have we fixed you up this month? This is ridiculous. And the same with even the police, when they're arresting people, the real professionals out there aren't engaging in gratuitous acts of violence or emotional acts of vandalism where they're just emotionally putting people down. There's always going to be bad apples out there, but most of the time that's not the case. Unfortunately, we started talking about politics a little bit, and I was cringing for our poor GOP listeners, but
they can handle it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, but there's been so much abuse from public speeches, so much disrespect. I think we've lost a lot of courtesy in our country that used to be the norm, and I hope soon we can get back to that.
Yeah. I like hearing other people's opinions, like Republican, Democrat. I don't consider myself either one, to be honest. I thought it was kind of, I don't know. I'm not really that, I'm aware of politics, but it's not really something that I commit to.
Right. Well, I'm the same way. I want to have a policy discussion, but I don't want to have a tribal slap fest where I'm slapping them down, they're slapping me down, and
exactly
we're going back and forth, grinding on each other, making it personal.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like it's always kind of devolves to. And even when you're trying to just be normal, it's like they're da 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 da. It's like,
and some marriages are like that, right? So, and the problem again for those of us who are caught up in marriages like that or in long-term romances like that, is so often our view of reality becomes so skewed that we normalize the abuse, and we've given up setting boundaries because that didn't work. We've given up on that, and this is the way it is. This is the way they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's all. And you might occasionally engage in an eye roll, at least internally. That's just the way they are. They're always going to be there. They go again.
Yeah.
and I think it's one of the most powerful parts of our human nature is our ability to adapt to almost anything. Well, really, just about anything short of death. But it's also our Achilles heel because we have the capacity to adapt even to abusive behavior and abusive relationships.
Yeah.
And we become blind to it. But that doesn't mean that the damage doesn't occur.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just the hurt feelings or the distance emotionally and the lack of intimacy. It's also the loss of the ability to engage in a truly intelligent conversation with diverse opinions where we're getting new ideas. So our very problem-solving ability in friendships, in marriages, in romances, in the workplace, it all suffers from a kind of groupthink dominated by can we call that person the autocrat at the top of the food chain? Whether it's a man or a woman, everybody knows who's in charge, and we all sort of kowtow to that.
Yeah.
And I think in those situations, once one of our listeners becomes aware that they're in one of those relationships, you can try setting boundaries, but most of the time, I think you are going to be punished for speaking up, when it's truly culturally normed in a workplace or in a religion or a cult group or a political cult group. And I think that it's very important then to consider your option of simply leaving.
Yeah, that's the act part.
Yeah. Well, that's part, because I think speaking up can be part of the acting, right?
Yeah.
And trying to elicit some sort of understanding from the other person. I don't do that to you. It's not okay with me if you do that to me. And I think a certain amount of arguing has to be normalized as being okay for me.
Yeah.
And for the listeners. I think if you can't stick up for yourself verbally, that's a real problem. I mean, if you're always just fading away, because not every abusive instance is perpetrated by a committed abuser. A lot of people get abusive just thoughtlessly in the rush to get something done, and they forget themselves and they say something that they wish they hadn't said.
Yeah, that's what I thought my friend would have.
Right.
You know, he slept it off. He's probably going to be, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I kind of was out of line, but no, it's like, I thought about this. I slept on it. And you're wrong, and I'm right, and you deserved me screaming at you.
Right, and the mistake, like you said, 6 months later, trying to get together with him and see if things had changed. So long as the other person has never looked you up and apologized, you have no grounds for thinking anything has changed, right?
Yeah, people like that don't apologize.
Unless they do get to a point, and because I have to.
I see him every day at the gym now, and I had to go up to him.
You do?
Yeah, I just set a boundary with him. Yeah.
Recently.
So he started coming into the gym. I knew he went to the same gym, but he started coming in the mornings last November. So November 2023. So I saw him. He didn't see me. He wasn't going to even come up to me probably if he did see me. So I rehearsed lines and I went up to him and I just said really simply like, hey, just want to say I see you. Just want to acknowledge you. And going forward, we don't have to say hi to each other. We don't have to have any conversations, but I just want to come here and acknowledge you and just kind of leave it at that. And he just said, okay.
Okay.
And then I turned around and then we see each other almost every weekday, Monday through Friday.
Wow.
And then I had to process while working through all that. And I was like, I wonder if he's thinking about all the ways that he treated me and if that's so. It's been good to process there, but it was also difficult.
I think one of the key areas of growth is for each of us as individuals to become comfortable with our own dark, evil side of ourselves, where I can behave badly and that's okay for me to acknowledge and to look at, and to get real used to making apologies, because I believe we all have a lot to apologize for.
Yeah.
Very few of us are perfect.
Yeah.
Like your friend.
Well, yeah. This is a guy who told me all writers were stupid. Acting's dumb. Improv is stupid.
Therapy's dumb.
Therapy's dumb. Yeah. It's like and then you're around that for 20 years. You think this is your friend and you're in that world. I don't know. We were having a conversation before this about that. And then it's all that's like coming into you. And then also this boundaries conversation, I was even thinking about my work stuff. Like a lot of my work was some small businesses. And there is no HR department in small businesses.
Right.
It's run by the leader, the boss. And typically they are chaotic and crazy. And granted, they did put this thing together and they are running stuff. But I mean, I remember one guy in Chicago, I worked at a deli called the New York Deli. The guy was from Brooklyn. And if people were late or didn't show up, he'd scream, cuss at them, scream them out of the place while he's firing them. like tell them to get the F out of the store. You're effing me and this and that, just like complete New York, it's in Chicago, I guess. So maybe but then again, it's the norm. That's
such a poser.
Yeah. But it becomes the norm. And then it's like,
right. Yeah. I agree that, it takes a certain amount of narcissism to be someone who starts a business or someone, because nobody's invited you to this part of town to start your business. Mm-hmm. You have to be a little bit narcissistic, but not, I think, toxically so. And there have been enough studies of mental health to know that there are plenty of people, and I don't want to make it sound like it's the majority, but there are plenty of people in middle management or in small businesses who do have those kinds of behavioral problems, but very few people at the C-suite level where they're CEOs or CFOs. They're not really so often in charge at that level, because it simply doesn't work. Talented people don't hang out for that kind of abuse.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Right.
So I wasn't talented for a while.
You just weren't talented enough for him, but I think there are people out there who I think they were raised that way. And the idea of facing that they have behaved badly and they've treated someone in an utterly inhumane way, with the realization would throw them into a dark place that's very empty.
Yeah.
And so they just don't dare.
They don't even look at it.
Yeah, they can't entertain that possibility that they might have done that. And I don't, at that point, it's pathological. And at that point, once you can separate yourself from the abuse, I think that it's appropriate to pity such people, because they didn't want to be those people.
Yeah.
They simply don't see what they themselves are doing.
Yeah.
There's
and I feel like really quick, I got to that point. I feel like with pretty much all the people, and then also realizing I can set the boundary, I can defend it. And then if I don't want it, I could leave. And I had a choice with my friend. I mean, the smile on his face, the look up, oh, hey, it was like, everything was just normal. It was like such like a crazy thing to experience. Like just
when you came back to ride motorcycles, you mean that time?
No, this was in November at the gym.
He was willing to greet you with open arms.
Smile, hey, just what's going on? Just it's like
nothing ever happened.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I'm like
etch a sketch it all away, and we start over.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not falling for that again, because even when we came back for the motorcycle thing, he's like, I've changed. I'm a completely different person, and blah blah blah.
When it comes to boundaries, I think I don't know where we are in this episode time wise, but I mean, one thing I think that would be worth closing on would be for everyone to think about memorizing this statement. I know it's a little bit wordy, but my pain upon breaking up from any relationship, whether it's romantic or workplace or any other kind of friendship or anything like that, my pain upon breaking up will be directly proportional to the degree to which I've compromised my own terms. And we've all heard Clint Eastwood say, a man's got to live his life on his own terms. You got to be true to yourself, stuff like that. And it takes these abusive, crazy people in our lives to help us realize, oh yeah, I'm not cool with that.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that sort of behavior. And so we get to be grateful for them in our lives. Thank you, because you're the one who taught me I'm not going to ever tolerate abuse again.
Yeah. And I will say that's so true about the pain, because it's bad enough getting out of a relationship where you're compromising your boundaries. And I had that with my ex in a way for 3 years or so, 3.5 years. And then I had the 20-year friendship to process on top of that. So that's a lot of processing, and it's not good. Like you said, you suffer, and that stuff gets inside of you. So it's like to release it isn't like flipping on a switch and then it's just like gone.
Right.
It's like, how long is this going to take? It's like, and it's just pulling it out. And like all this stuff kind of comes to the surface, and then you release it. But
so you have some new rules. You have these new rules, right? That I'm never gonna let somebody treat me like that again.
Yeah, and never again.
And at least if you think about it, you're going to have new rules, right? I guess there are some people who never quite figure that out. But
that was getting smashed by a boulder and like going under like a whack-a-mole.
And the reason the pain level changes is I didn't accept any of their abuse. I mean, if I go in with real clarity, I know my boundaries, I know what's acceptable and what's not. Somebody violates my boundaries, whether it's a romance or a friendship or a work relationship, I get to say, or even let's say a church relationship too, we could throw that all in there. And I get to say, no, that's not going to work for me. And if they can't up their game and make it right by apologizing, I get to fade away, but I don't have to have any pain at that point. I mean, because I didn't compromise my terms at all. And so I can walk away from those abusive relationships where basically there was abuse on offer, but I declined the offer.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing because it's like, I think you need to get a t-shirt that says that. That's not going to work for me because it's such a simple phrase, but it's like, oh, that could have helped me. If I knew that, maybe that could have helped. And it's always like I always like finding like the simplest things. And it's like, that's a very simple thing to say.
We're always, I mean, all of us privately struggle with finding the words when they aren't readily in our vocabulary or in our mouth. And Al-Anon and AA and all the other 12-step groups have got a lot of phrases that I've adopted in my own life because they are so succinct and they make so much sense. So I've seen them in movies as well, like Fight Club. How's that working for you?
Yeah.
You know, when they, you know, that's one of the lines in the movie. And it's terrific to consider that question, but the answer, yeah, that really doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
You know, that's to be able to say that with a real deadpan voice to somebody, that's not going to fly.
It's empowering too.
It's very empowering.
It's like, that's what I think too. Like, what are your thoughts on, I think if you do set boundaries and you have boundaries, then you just are in your power. You're not giving it away. You're not compromising yourself, and you're not feeling or making yourself vulnerable to that extreme pain that you could feel if you go too far with it.
Yeah, I exactly. And if we don't learn this in our love lives, there's a real problem. And I think that our love lives are the most vulnerable to this sort of abuse because we can pretty easily go out and get another job if that's what we're looking for. We can even make other friends, you know, in society. But the special nature of a romantic relationship, by its definition, means it's not like a group event, you know, where we're all going to go, where we just meet other groups of romantic partners like we do, say, with friends or with the workplace. So the temptation to cave in so that I can hold on to the love I have because really nobody else wants me. And maybe this is all I deserve. This is the best I'm ever going to find. I should just be grateful and try to get along. And those are the lies we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about that is I think all men out there ought to know no woman can love a man she doesn't respect. That's just impossible. And I think largely it's true the other way around as well. I don't think any of us can love somebody who lets us treat them like a doormat.
Yeah.
And we certainly can't love them the way we all want to be loved, as equals in a relationship that's respectful and abuse-free. So it's part of the territory. I mean, you got to be able to throw your elbows underneath the hoop and get a little space for yourself to be safe in every relationship. So defending yourself and maintaining command over your own territory, I think, is really important. It sounds so military when I say that, but I think sometimes a spatial metaphor is helpful. Your life, your looks, your way of kissing and of having sex, and your way of enjoying life, those are all deeply personal parts of yourself that are part of your territory. The way that you dress, the way that you groom your hair, that's all you. And for someone else to come in and put down your home, your decor, your family, your looks, that's absolutely unacceptable. They may not like it. They may not enjoy it. Well, that's okay. It wasn't designed with them in mind. And if they're so turned off by it, that's okay too, because there are other fish in the sea.
Well, that's what I like too. It's like that carefree attitude, because it is okay. It becomes okay for you to speak that, and then you don't take it personally if they then have an issue with it.
Right, because my pain upon breaking up will be directly proportional to the degree to which I've compromised my terms. And so if I can live and let live and let other people, move on, I think largely romance is a lot like playing, it's a lot like what Christ talks about when he talks about at the end times separating the sheep from the goats. I don't know why he didn't like goats. I love goats, but he didn't. And you have this selection process. There are all these people coming into our lives, and the more time we spend with the abusive, controlling, manipulative people out there, the less time we have for the really great people. And the great people are out there in enormous numbers. And if we all knew that, we wouldn't waste any time at all getting rid of those other people.
Nice. And this is why boundaries are your friend.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. They take some work and they take some courage, but they are worth it.
Great. So we'll wrap up there, and we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is as follows. Hi, Steve. I've been married for 10 years, and my wife's kind of distant lately. Then she recently dropped the bomb. She asked me how I would feel about opening up our marriage. I was too shocked to say much, so I told her I would think about it. Now I suspect she wants to have an affair, or maybe already has started one and wants a free pass. I'm not interested in having girlfriends on the side. I thought we were happy, and now I feel really hurt. How do I respond to my wife?
You know, this one is, I'm going to cheat on this one because I think it's actually pretty easy if he will take my advice. I don't think he knows enough. And I think for him to be able to look at his wife and to say, oh, that's so very interesting. Tell me more. You know, how long have you been feeling this way? And what is it you see as the end game like for our marriage? Do you imagine that we will both be having affairs on the side, but we'll stay married and it'll be just fine? Or do you imagine that we might, drift apart over time and carry on with others? Are you thinking polyamory? I would want to know the answers to all those questions if I were in his shoes. But I also would want him to be able to tell her how grateful he is that she brought this up, that she spoke up and talked to him in what I think is a fairly honorable way, because she at least spoke about it rather than carrying on secretly and privately behind his back. And I think a way that would be truly unethical. She has made a proposal. It's certainly not the kind that led to their marriage in the first place. But it's a proposal nonetheless, and I think it deserves some examination. Maybe there's some great thing that will come out of it for him. I doubt it, but I try to be really open-minded even when I think negatively about an idea. It's like, well, pitch me. Go ahead and sell me on this. What's in it for me? How's that supposed to look?
Yeah.
And the other blessing is, if none of it works and it sounds like a horrible idea, he's free. He gets to go ahead and correct his mistake with this procedure we call divorce and move on with his life, and accept that he needs to be a little more careful about partner selection in the future, and maybe go just a wee bit slower in terms of commitment. And certainly, I think he would owe himself the downtime between relationships to process this and consider, how did he miss this, and what was going on, and did he have any part in it at all, or is this just like this real anomalous sort of experience that was just about her journey? So I would want to suggest all of that to him. And the conversation with her isn't, I want to be really clear about this. I'm not talking about a 1-hour conversation, but a conversation that could go on for weeks, if not months, learning more about it. Because I'm guessing, as open and honest as she's not being completely honest. Because that's really hard for any of us humans. She may feel increasingly honest, though, as he demonstrates that he's open to intellectual intimacy and really hearing her thoughts out. And instead of arguing with her, well, you shouldn't feel that way. That's wrong. How can you do this to me? I think just being open-minded enough to encourage her to open up and let him have the full impact of her truth, whatever that is. And, whatever that is, he'll be in a much better informed place to say something like, well, that sounds interesting. Or, I don't think that's going to work for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Steve. And thanks for the question. And thank you all for listening. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yes, we will.